All right, everybody, let's do it. Day 3. Got some VIPs in the audience over there. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan, one of the co-chairs for the product track for Denver Startup Week. I am going to kick it off to Laura in a second here, but I'm going to go through, if you want to jump to that second slide. Yeah, Denver Startup Week is the largest free startup-focused event in the world, and it wouldn't be free if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors. So shout out to Amazon, Capital One, Dell, Downtown Denver Partnership, kind of the main title sponsors. And then for the product track specifically, we have Pi Insurance. So if anyone's looking for insurance for their small business, check out Pi. We've got a few others as well, just to call out. Just on the next slide. Sorry. No, you're good. Anytime you see these names around, just give them a shout out. Again, this wouldn't happen without the amazing sponsors. Then you as well. All of the content for Denver Startup Week is built by people like Laura, putting together great content for the community, by the community. So we're excited you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and thanks for being here for day 3.
Thanks, Ryan. Perfect. Hey, everyone. Thank you. Oh, can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. Sweet. Thank you all for braving the 9 a.m. session and coming out bright and early. We're going to talk about radical candor this morning and how we can use that to help improve our products and our product teams. I'll start with a little bit of a presentation introducing radical candor, but then I have 3 amazing panelists that are going to come up and share their experiences with feedback and radical candor and how they've used that to improve their products. So we're excited. So just a quick show of hands. Who has heard of radical candor? I'll see them. Oh, great. Okay, awesome. So this might be a little bit of a review, but it's okay to kind of start from the basics. So we're going to start with Radical Candor and what it is. Radical Candor is a book that was written by Kim Scott. Kim Scott kind of got her hands in quite a bit of the startup scene when everything was exploding. I think later in her career, she was a CEO coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, various other tech companies. She did work at Google. She also was part of Apple University and helped train managers at Apple. So she has quite the resume. And through all of her experiences, even starting her own startups, she realized that there was kind of this gap in the market of how to manage people, how to kind of just have these great team dynamics. And so from that, Radical Candor was born. So what is radical candor? Radical candor is just a straightforward and deeply human way of giving and receiving feedback. She writes the book through the lens of managing people, but it really is applicable to any human one-on-one interaction in or outside of work, to be honest. And there's 2 vital components to it. There's caring personally, that's that deeply human piece, and challenging directly, and that's the feedback part. So we'll get into all of that. And the 2 dimensions. So the first, the y-axis, as you know, anything in product comes down to a matrix. So we're starting with a y-axis, and the big reveal will be a 2x2. But caring personally is the y-axis. She calls this the give a damn axis. This is how much you care for your fellow employees, humans, anybody that kind of you work with. And really caring personally means caring about them on a human level beyond just, day-to-day work and tasks, and really getting to know them, their motivations, ambitions, kind of thinking about them as almost their own persona and kind of filling out that matrix, and learning about their whole selves outside of work. So this definitely is a challenge. Sometimes people aren't as open, but over time, building a trusting relationship, you kind of are able to care personally. If anybody's a Taylor Swift fan, the opposite of love is indifference, and so that's the other side of the y-axis. So caring personally, indifference. So if you don't really care about your fellow employees or the people that you're managing, you'll kind of end up dropping into that end of the axis, and we'll see where the quadrants have you fall. The x-axis is challenging directly. So this is the feedback scale. She calls this the willingness to piss people off axis. And so this is like, how brave are you to challenge people directly, really push people to their full potential, and give, employees or, the people that you work with the feedback so that they do improve and they know where they can, avoid their mishaps, etc. So, they do, we all know giving and receiving feedback are tough conversations. So you might, ruffle little feathers, piss people off a little bit, but that's where the matrix comes in. We'll get into that. So like I said, it all boils down to a 2x2. When you put the two together, caring personally and challenging directly, you get this quadrant, radical candor. So you care deeply about the person. You want them to reach their full potential, their maximum. But, you're willing to challenge them and do it in a very genuine and authentic way. And that is, the crux of radical candor. We'll talk about the other 4 quadrants, or the other 3 quadrants. Caring personally and silence. Silence is the opposite of challenging directly, is called ruinous empathy. Challenging directly but being indifference is called obnoxious aggression. We'll get into that. And then the worst quadrant, the negative on negative, the silence and indifference, is called manipulative insincerity. And that is a tough quadrant to be in for sure. So we'll take a break. We'll go through those, but kind of a gut check. Why does this matter? Ultimately, radical candor is about being genuine. It's about being authentic, and really building trusting relationships with your team members. Good product teams produce good products. If you trust your team members, you're able to give them feedback. Your product is only going to be better for that. And we'll talk about different opportunities as to where you can kind of practice radical candor. Radical candor is not only about giving feedback, but it's also about receiving feedback. We know that it is already difficult to give feedback, but it definitely is an art to receive that criticism, and building that trusting relationship with your manager or your coworker, to be able to trust them to know that it's all coming from a genuine and authentic place also allows you to improve. So it's a two-way street. It's not just one way. Thirdly, through radical candor, if you're understanding where your employees or your fellow coworkers want to go and get in their careers, you're able to manage your team's ambitions, grow more effectively, give them opportunities that help them grow personally, and that will allow both you and your team to flourish, right? If you give them the opportunities of exactly where they want to get their careers, that helps you and your team in the short term, and then obviously helps them in the long term. And if you know everybody's motivations and ambitions, you can actually balance the team effectively. So it's a win-win for everybody. And then finally, teamwork makes the dream work, right? Creating an efficient and effective collaborative system. Product teams thrive, especially balanced teams thrive on collaboration. So really being able to be open and collaborative with your team members, again, just kind of lends itself to better products. You're able to get the feedback, implement it, and kind of push where you need to be pushed and grow that way. So let's talk about the other 3 quadrants, what radical candor is not. Obnoxious aggression. While it sounds aggressive, Kim Scott actually says this quadrant is, if you can't be radically candid, it's second best to be obnoxiously aggressive. And this is because you're actually challenging and helping the person grow. You're still giving them feedback but you're not doing it in a way that really is that nice potentially. So if you're indifferent, you don't care genuinely about the person, but you're still giving them feedback. So when you're giving them praise through obnoxious aggression, it sounds kind of like empty compliments or regurgitated information. Again, it's not coming from that genuine or authentic place. Criticism, I think we've all probably been in a situation where you've been kind of humiliated in front of a group from a manager or a coworker. It can come across as condescending or arrogant, sometimes humiliating. And so that's obnoxious aggression, not ideal, but if you can't be radically candid, at least you're still pushing your employees with some sort of feedback. Manipulative insincerity, that's that negative axis. And this is really when it happens, you don't care about the person. but you do care about how they perceive you. So you're not giving guidance and you're kind of being a jerk about it. So any sort of praise is really insincere. It's false apology, avoidance of uncomfortable conversations. You're just not really like dealing with the person at all. Criticism can be, that fake, too nice or dishonest. So this is really, if there's any quadrant you don't want to be in, it is definitely this one, the negative. And then finally, ruinous empathy. Kim Scott has a lot of examples. This is where she fell before she kind of moved over to being radically candid. And she was a manager, and she cared very deeply about her employees, but she cared so deeply and she cared too much about what they thought about her that she didn't challenge them at all. And kind of these bad behaviors or, areas where they could have improved, she didn't say anything until it grew and grew and grew, and it was too late. So, you're not being specific, you're being very ambiguous, you're kind of dancing around. If there's any sort of criticism happening, usually it's silence, it's insincere or too nice. Your ego gets in the way and you care too much, and you're not willing, on that axis, not willing to piss people off a little bit. So that's ruinous empathy. Cool. So we're going to transition into empowering product teams and then transition over to the panelists. So how do we actually put this into practice? First of all, I'm sure you guys have heard the adage, you can't pour from an empty cup, but it's really important that you take care of yourself first. If you're coming to work energized and, in a good mood, you're able to practice self-care. And again, everything just kind of comes from a genuine place from there. So the first thing first, take care of yourself, know what your recipe for, I think that's what Kim Scott calls it, like your recipe for work. She has to exercise 3 times a week and, have a special type of coffee or whatever it is that lights you up, like puts you in a good place to come to work as your best self is important. Secondly, if you do manage a team, granting your team authority, or, if you're a part of a team where, trying to advocate for your team with your management or leadership to get that sense of agency. Trusting relationships come from that. So if employees feel empowered to, do their best work and have the space to look at problems and figure out solutions without being micromanaged, that automatically just builds a trusting relationship and a good one open for feedback. Encouraging sharing but respecting boundaries. This one's important because caring personally is all about learning about the person from a holistic level. But everybody brings their whole selves to work differently. And so you have to learn, that's part of kind of caring personally, is learning those boundaries and understanding how people, want to present themselves and how much they want to give. You can't be like, hey, like, what'd you do last night? If they don't want to share what they want to do. So understanding the boundaries is part of caring personally. And again, they'll feel that you're respecting those boundaries and slowly, you can start to break down walls and continue to build that trusting relationship. So that is one thing that you probably just heard me repeat 8 million times is building trusting relationships. And here are a few guidelines, kind of 6 major bullets when you are giving and receiving feedback, and some tips on how to do it. So first of all, you need to build that trusting relationship. How do you do it? Be humble. Humble guidance depends on focusing the reality of the situation and not your perception. So really framing the feedback around the situation, the person's behavior, and the outcome, and coming from a very humble place is always better received than not. Making your intentions clear that you want to be helpful rather than hurtful. Again, this comes as you start to build that relationship, but being super precise about the feedback and exactly what it is, and then offering to help outsource or find resources to help. I think Kim Scott uses the example that she was reporting to Sheryl Sandberg at some point, and she was giving a presentation and just kept saying and Sheryl pulled her aside afterwards very precisely, very quickly. We'll get to immediacy next. But she was saying, she was like, you kind of sounded like a dumb blonde. Like we need to work on your public speaking. I have this resource for you. I'd love to do it with you. And, was able to come from a place of, she probably didn't say dumb blonde. That was probably my interpretation, but sorry to the blondes out there. But, being as precise and helping to find the resources to help a person. Third, immediacy. So feedback is always effective when it comes right on the heels of the situation. So in that example, Cheryl pulled her aside right after that meeting. Allowing feedback to build up, one, is inefficient, right? Then you are stuck with like an hour-long meeting monthly or however the cadence is, where you have to go through all the things that you saw opportunities of improvement. Whereas like these are little tidbits, right? Right in the situation, you can apply it immediately. And it allows you and whoever you're giving feedback to practice. Being consistent allows everybody to get comfortable with this type of environment. So being consistent with giving immediate feedback helps people get engaged. It doesn't feel as bad as like an hour-long, review. The fourth one is really interesting in our remote post-COVID world, but being in person is always better. I would be interested to hear people's experiences about giving and receiving feedback when we were all, hunkered down and on Zoom. But there are just certain miscommunications that happen, definitely from writing. We all, if anybody is a Nick Viall fan, it's a podcast I listen to. He's a former bachelor. And he always says that you read texts and emails in the frame of mind that you're in at that moment. So if you're feeling on the defensive, even though the text or the email didn't come through that way, it could be perceived that way, right? So a lot of misunderstandings come through written communication. But then also there is just a personal element about being in person and doing it quickly. All right, let me take a break. 5, public praise, private criticism. We all love to get great feedback. And so, public praise is great. It sets the example. Doing it in front of others, you're able to point out what, a model of good behavior is. If you are giving criticism, it's best to do that one-on-one on the side. It just, again, kind of, you start to fall into the obnoxious aggression quadrant when you're, giving it in front of people and humiliating the person. So, public criticism tends to trigger defensiveness, breaks down some relationships, unless you have already built that relationship where you can kind of do that. And then finally, this one's really important to not personalize. She uses, using the pronouns you or your versus this or that is really important. So target the issue, not the person. The example I have here is you're wrong or you're careless versus I think this is wrong or there are too many typos here. So again, being really specific about your word choices, again, takes people off of the defensive and makes them feel comfortable that, it's not them, it's just this instance or this situation. Great. So how do we bring this to balanced teams? We just think it's important to remind ourselves, again, coming from a humble place, that we're all just representatives of our disciplines. So product, designers, and devs, we don't own our disciplines. We are representatives of them, and everything is an opportunity for discussion. We always say that, user stories are a contract for discussion. So, coming from that place where we can take and accept feedback and give and take a little bit is always important. And then there are definitely opportunities in our day-to-day ceremonies that we can already start to implement it. You can leave here today and start to include these things. If you're not doing retros are the mecca for radical candor. So they offer a safe space for a team to give feedback on what's going well, what can be improved. Again, they're usually done on a regular cadence. So it's a great way to start to practice this type of feedback in a space that's already designed for feedback. So building those trusting relationships, keeping them blameless, being really being intentional with the feedback that you're giving. Design critiques. Designers definitely have some of the hardest jobs. They are, in the spotlight more. Their work is in the spotlight more often than not. We can't go. Not everyone of us can go into the code and, critique what's going on there. We know when there are bugs and that type of stuff, but we can't really critique engineers' work. Product managers, are a little bit of everything. But design critiques, designers really have to put their egos on the side and, get feedback. The products will be much better from garnering this feedback, balancing the needs of the user, the business, as well as, what is actually technically feasible. So opening design critiques, if you don't have them, implementing them and really kind of putting your work and surfacing that is, again, a great place to start to implement giving and receiving feedback. And then finally, I think this is an area where product managers generally tend to lead, but, collaborative debates, if we're trying to figure out the problem or the solution. At Crafted, we like to say strong opinions loosely held. So, being open to other people, their thoughts, their feedback is, again, a great place, a great arena for us to practice this. So that is the intro to Radical Candor and product teams. We're going to bring up our 3 panelists. We have Adam Oliver, who is the CEO and founder of Crafted. Jess Sherlock, a product coach, and she calls herself a fractional product leader, but I think it's more than that. And then Mehdi Tahiri, he is the director of product development at a company here in Denver called Talent Reef. So I'll let them introduce themselves briefly, but let's welcome them to the stage. Yes. All right, so we have 2 mics that's already on.
All right. Can you hear me?
Cool. Yeah, Adam, if you want to start, and we can pass the mic and just do some brief intros, and then we'll get into questions.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, thanks for joining. So I'm the founder of Crafted, product development consultancy with PMs, designers, engineers. LP's one of my teammates. Kind of cut my teeth on management and Radical Candor back at Pivotal Labs, helping them grow their PM and design teams. They've now since been acquired by VMware, so they're kind of a bigger company. And then started Crafted 4.5 years ago. And I'm glad to see so many people out here in the audience today. Of all the books I've read over the last 5 or 10 years, I would say this is probably number 1, if not like top 3. Phenomenal book, super important. And if you can get this right, it really helps everything else you do in your career and with your team. So thanks for joining at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Hi, my name is Mehdi Tahiri. I am director of product at a company just 3 blocks away from here called Talent Reef. We are an applicant tracking system, so we help companies recruit and retain employees. I've been there for about 7.5 years. My background is mainly engineering. Was a software engineer, tech lead, engineering manager before I moved to product about 3 years ago.
Hi, I'm Jess Sherlock. I, started my career in film. I've always been drawn to roles where I can coordinate, and so eventually landed in product. Up until 2018, I was director of product at Go Spot Check. Really got to cut my teeth on management there with Adam by my side. So probably some shared stories we'll talk about there. But since leaving Go Spot Check in 2018, I decided I wanted to do something different and give back to the product community in a slightly different way. So instead of being a day-to-day practitioner, I coach product managers at all sorts of different companies, typically early stage startups, but I have some clients at some more established companies as well. And then I also work with product organizations, especially early stage, kind of pre-seed to Series A, who are trying to grow and develop their product teams. So excited to share about what I've experienced personally, but also what I've seen.
Why don't you keep the mic, Jess, and we can start with, do you want to just share a time when Radical Candor helped you?
Yes. So I have a story from when I was director of product, so I'll leave names unnamed. But suffice to say, the organization had grown dramatically. So I started at Go Spot Check as the first PM. And within 4 years, I was overseeing almost the entire product organization with 8 agile teams, I think we had at the time, focused on a couple different products plus some R&D initiatives. So lots of responsibility, and it was my first experience managing. And I remember I had done a ton of hiring. I was joking at the time that somehow I stopped being a product person and like my whole job was recruiting, which is part of being a product leader. But I had filled one of my last roles and was really excited about this individual joining the team as a PM. They were fantastic during the interview process, strong feedback from everybody who had interviewed them. And I was just really, really excited about them joining the team. So they joined on a Monday. By the end of that week, we had had a happy hour with other folks in the organization. And I started to notice some of the interpersonal relationships were a little awkward and strained. So I started to dig into that with a couple folks. Just so happened my best friend was one of the people who had sort of a funky interaction with this new hire. So I come to find out this person, unbeknownst to them, had really carried an ego into the organization and was really putting a lot of people off in settings where they should have been getting to know the product, getting to know the teams, getting to know the processes. This person was already not well liked. And honestly, I didn't know what to do. So I went to my manager and he said, you should ask him how it's going. And if he doesn't see it, you got to tell him. I was like, oh my God, I was so nervous. So I pulled him into a room. I said, happy Friday, happy first week. How do you think your first week went? And he was on cloud 9. Went great. Everybody's so nice. And I'm going, oh, good. So I said, well, he goes, how do you think it went? I go, not that great. And we had a personal relationship. I was the hiring manager. And I said, I was really excited about you joining the team. You're so smart. But this week did not go well. And I shared a couple examples. This team was feeling really alienated. This team felt like you kind of brought an ego into that one meeting. And I said, I don't know what happened. This doesn't sound like you. But I need to see a different you next week, or this isn't going to work out. And I'll tell you what, he said thank you. And I was like, oh, wow, what a relief. And he ended up being one of the highest performers on the team. But it was one of the hardest things I ever did. I would say that's probably the first time I did that. So.
Adam, Midi, any stories from you guys to share?
Yeah, I kind of have a story as well. So I think I had the manager once pulled me aside to tell me, hey, like when you have an idea that you want to implement or a process change, usually how you approach it is that you kind of like go and talk to people individually instead of like talking to the group and kind of like pitch your idea and get feedback, which is kind of like perceived as being manipulative. It's like, okay. So at first I was like, brushed it off and I'm like, well, I'm just trying to gauge, the interest and see what people think about the idea, what I can adjust before actually bring it to the group to discuss. And he realized I was kind of like trying to be like, oh yeah, I don't see that as a big deal. And he didn't back down. Like he kept challenging me. He's like, I don't think I'm coming across. Like it's really something you should probably consider changing because it's really a few people have noticed that. And it's not, I know it's not your intention, but it's just how it's being perceived. So I keep thinking about that moment. It's like when you're walking around and you have like food stuck in your teeth and like nobody's telling you that for a long time, because that's something I've been doing for a while. And to have that person finally like coming to you and pulling you aside privately, of course, to tell me that, but also like notice that I was not really listening and tried to move on and pulled me back to be like, no, you really need to do something about this. So that's kind of like an experience with Radical Candor.
Nice. All right, yeah, I'll share one because I think it definitely kind of set my career in the path that it's on, which I'm still incredibly grateful for this person, and which hopefully gives you guys like the encouragement to go do this because it can really change people's lives. So about 12 years ago, we were doing a startup. We were working with an awesome team up in Boulder. And I come from an engineering background, and I've always like struggled and wanted to keep, hold of my engineering roots because it's a valuable thing. You don't want to stray too far away. And we were up there building this software, probably one of the best software teams in the state, maybe in the country. And I was trying to do both. I was still trying to engineer. I was trying to also, I came from the client side, so I was the person that knew what we needed to build also. So I was trying to run the backlog, do this PM thing, which I didn't know what product management was at the time. I didn't know what Radical Candor was. I don't think it had come out at that point. And so I'm trying to do everything. I'm working 80, 100 hours a week, like trying to do the startup. And this guy that ran the consultancy in Boulder was like, Adam, look, like you can code. We're happy to teach you. We're happy to have you pair with us and do all this stuff. But but by the way, we just kind of need you to tell us what to do and help us prioritize. And if you can just do that, we can all be successful, and we can ship this product, and we can win, and it's going to be good. I was like, oh my God, but like, I got to give up coding. Like, what do you mean? My career's going to like tank. I'm going to get diluted, like all this stuff. He's like, no, just be a product manager. Like, you're good at it. Like, you want to do this. I was getting my MBA. And I look back, like, that person is still probably my top 1 or 2 mentors in my career. He was at a Rockies game with us last night. I literally thank him every time I can. I'm like, dude, you made my career. Like, thank you. Like, it would have been fine otherwise, right? It wasn't like do or die, but it's like, dude, you pushed me in the right direction, and you made my job easier at that moment. Instead of working 80 or 100 hours a week, I could be like, oh, I can just focus on this and drop it to, startup. It was still 50 or 60. But I was like, thank you. This was awesome, man. I'm so glad you told me to do this. So it works, and it can really change people's kind of careers, lives, and I still thank him quite often for doing that for me. So, yeah, so that gives you guys the encouragement to go do this stuff for people that you're around, whether it's peers or people above you, people below you, any of that. So.
Nice. Awesome. Well, if anybody doesn't know, Adam is actually my manager, so we practice Radical Candor quite often. And so, Adam, why don't you, since you do practice quite a bit, do you want to tell us about your learning curve with Radical Candor and your experiences there?
Yeah, what I would say, like, as you're trying to get comfortable with this with your team, so one, don't always just jump right in and assume you have the trust, because like the first axis, right, is caring personally. So you can say like, hey, I'm just going to give you this feedback, and just know that I'm in the Radical Candor quadrant, because just I'm telling you I am, so just trust me. What you have to do is like build the trust first. Make sure these people know that you care personally. Figure out ways to do that before you jump in. And then the other way that I found helped me get there and have these uncomfortable conversations, whether it's in the either of the 3 main quadrants, was not looking at the person and say, man, how can I really just go doctor and help them, and I'm going to save them and do all this stuff. It's more put yourself in the shoes. It's like, and kind of almost blame yourself or guilt yourself into it. It's like, man, if I don't give this person this feedback, like our product's going to suffer, their career is going to suffer, and just the team in general is going to suffer. So that's a good way to almost force yourself to like be comfortable giving any sort of the feedback. It's like they are going to be better off for me giving them this feedback, and the team and the product, and that helps you kind of get over that what Jess was talking about, that crazy anxiety of like, oh my God, I got to have a tough conversation right now, or I'm going to judge somebody's work. Just know that it's all in this helpful kind of format, and I've almost never seen it go really wrong. Usually it gets perceived and taken very, very well. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Adam also bribes with coffee and lunch, or
Yeah, butter them up first, for sure.
Yeah, my learning curve with Radical Candor, I would say, is before moving to product, I was an engineering manager, so managing about 14 developers in QA. And if you think about engineers, if you work with any, they are like a very pragmatic type persona. So like giving feedback for me was super easy. You just go to them and like, hey, you did this, it had this outcome, this is what we're gonna do to change things. And it always went well. Moving to product, start managing PMs, but also product designers. When you think of a product designers, different persona. They are artists. There is like high sensitivity to what they do. And I think on the first week, without really taking the time to build in the trust, like you said, I kind of like called one of them after a meeting to discuss how a meeting went, and gave, like, as I usually do, very direct, transparent, challenging directly kind of type feedback. And it did not go well. So she shut down, there were tears, and I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I was not expecting that. So the learning curve for me there is like, even if you care personally, first of all, like, you have to build that trust. So take the time to build the trust before you can have that direct feedback. But also, like, you have to adjust to the person in front of you, which is not something I had in mind at that time. Because for me, like, somebody's giving you feedback, it's a gift. And I'm always like open to criticism. I don't know, probably through the year, I just learned how to handle that. But anybody that's giving me feedback is welcome. And I really don't care like what formatting and what way you're giving me the feedback, that's a gift. But I learned to realize that it's not the same for everyone. People have different sensitivities, and you have to adjust the way you're giving feedback to someone. So I've been working now with those product designers for 3 years, and of course through the years we build that relationship, and I'm able now to like give them feedback fairly easily. So yeah, that helped me a lot. That was kind of like my learning curve. So in summary, like keep in mind that people are different and see how they react when you give them feedback, and try to adjust accordingly.
That was very insightful. All jokes aside, no, that does tie into my answer though, which is, we'll talk about this in a few, but I, as an Enneagram 8, if any of you know what that means, I am very comfortable in that bottom right column. I'm also from New York, so it's like in my blood to be really direct, painfully. And so as I was on this journey, there were probably 3 things that really helped me. Number 1 is I had help. So as goofy as he was, I had a leadership coach when I was first starting to manage people. He's kind of a goofball, but I really liked his approach. And so between him and some of the rest of the management, our entire organization actually read the book. And so there was this shared consciousness around radical candor. And so in that environment, it was really conducive to experimenting and trying and failing, but there was this openness in the organization that we were trying this on. The second thing was letting any other folks that I was working with know that I was working on this. So I still do this to this day when I'm working with new clients. I will say, I am direct, but I'm going to do it because I care. And so I like to set that stage early and reference that as needed later. Once I got good at radical candor, or maybe not good, more comfortable, less anxious, I noticed that I was over-indexing on pointing out negatives. And so I really made the effort to start to encourage folks to continue doing things that were working well. And I noticed almost immediately that the people I was managing, and especially now with folks that I'm coaching, folks kind of often have that imposter syndrome piece, right? Where it's like you just assume you're always fucking everything up. So it can be really helpful in building the trust to make sure that you're pointing out the things that are working so that you don't lose them in the mix. So that's kind of where I'm at nowadays, is trying to make sure that I'm balancing the feedback.
Great point. Yeah. Cool. So let's get into the tea. Let's tell me about a time when you weren't living in radical candor. Jess, if you have the microphone, you can start. Where were you on the 2x2? How did it impact the people you were dealing with, or if you were the recipient? Tell us a little bit about those quadrants.
Yeah. I'm going to be a little bit vague here, but so I started my career working in agencies, and then I ended up in-house working on a software team. I'm actually going to go a different direction than we talked about. Okay. Slightly different direction. It's good. Curveball. Don't freak out. So just out of curiosity, does anyone work at like an agency of some kind where you're a consultant? Okay. I thought this might be helpful. Okay. So early in my career, and again now, I work with clients. And there's this tendency to want to make them happy, right? Because if you don't, your email's going to blow up. Someone's complaining to someone. It's a whole charade. Your weekend's gone. So early in my career, what I see now is that I was definitely falling into the ruinous empathy and maybe sometimes manipulative insincerity, where in an effort to avoid that conflict or maintain the relationship, I wasn't pushing back. So now doing consulting again, kind of as I flash forward and have had people management experience, I noticed that I bring a very different me to those conversations, where now my challenge is, I've grown up in my career. I have that confidence. I have that previous experience. So I have the confidence now to say, this is how we should do it, or this is a pitfall we should avoid. So instead of finding myself sort of keeping the peace, now I'm having to kind of restrain myself from just steamrolling and continuing to kind of calibrate into that radical candor quadrant. So
That was great.
I can tell you care personally.
I do. For me, it also ties back when I was like an engineering manager, and I had a developer that just stopped caring. Basically, like he stays up all night playing video games. He misses stand up in the morning, and when he shows up to meetings, he's yawning all the time. So you can tell. And it's a guy I really cared about, and he was really good engineer. So like reach out, try to help him. We even moved like stand-ups to later in the morning so he can attend. So the whole team was like accommodating with him. But the behavior was not changing. So after a while, like try different things, try to care as much as I can. But he was just like not putting any effort on changing his own behavior. So I start falling into like the obnoxious aggression because I'm getting frustrated with him. So like I have reactions after that in meetings when I feel like he's not paying attention, where I can like get kind of like on him a little bit, which is not something I'm proud of looking back. But yeah, that's kind of like my experience of not being in the radical candor that I can remember.
Yeah, nice, good stuff. Yeah, I would say, I typically fall more often into the ruinous empathy bucket. I think my background is like, I like people, I like relationships. Not that I need everybody to love me or whatnot, but I just, want good friendships, and I'd rather have like good times. So if anything, I can fall that way. And that's where I was telling you guys, like, to get comfortable with it, I had to like push myself out of that bucket because it was better for the other people. It's better for the team, for the product. And I think I've learned more of that as I've founded Crafted. And really, I talk to our team a lot in LP up here. They're like, hey, we want to be like the best consultancy around. We want everybody to say like Crafted is an amazing team. They show up every day. They kick butt. We have this saying that came from Steve Martin that's be undeniably good. So I was like, well, if we can't live in the radical candor bucket, like how are we going to get there? How are we going to ensure that we're there every day? If I can't show that to the team that it's okay to be radically candid, how are they going to do it amongst each other? How are they going to vet out each other's products and designs? Stuff like that. So that helps push me out of that, but I definitely fall more often into that bucket. And then you have to like set up that trust. I think to one of Laura's slides, giving the team autonomy to give me feedback, like, guys, where did we screw up? Where did we do things right? Where did we do things wrong? So you start certainly with yourself. Before you go give other people feedback, make sure you're willing to take the feedback. Make sure you're willing to show them like, hey, if you give me feedback, I'm not going to tell you that feedback is wrong. You're going to absorb it. You're going to figure out how to act on it. You're going to show them that like, hey, we're in a culture of radical candor so that we can all improve and get better. And that'll kind of help you get out of there. And that's kind of forcing me every day hopefully out of ruinous empathy, getting better at challenging people, whether it's through their day-to-day interactions, through their design critiques. Like, I'm not going to hurt your feelings if I tell you I have a different opinion about your designs or whatnot. Or engineers, if we broke a bunch of stuff and shipped things and the app crashed. Okay, guys, let's figure it out. Like, what's going on? Why did we break things? And that helps. It helps kind of push us through the quadrants and get to the right spot more often. So.
Awesome. Well, you started to talk a little bit about, the day-to-day. So, Midi, I think you have the microphone. How does radical candor concepts impact cross-functional teams? So we talked a little bit about the balance team, but stakeholders, business units, people that might not be in that safe space, if you have any thoughts there.
So I would say as leaders and managers, oftentimes our employees come to us because they have a conflict with another employee, and it could be in the same team, could be like in a different department, etc. And us as managers, like the reaction is like you want to help them, but the idea is like sometimes they expect you to go actually do the work, which is go talk to that person on their behalf and resolve the problem, which is something that I'm absolutely against. So that comes from like the care personally and challenge directly is like, okay, you can vent to me, I'm gonna listen to you and all that, but I'm gonna challenge you to go talk to that person. I'm not gonna go do it for you. But I'm here if you need support. Reach out to me. If really like you tried everything and it didn't work out, then I can come up and help. So by doing that and through the years now, it is just like, I start seeing like that we build like an environment where every employee is like in charge of like trying to figure out how they can resolve the conflict without always having to go to their managers to do that. So I thought like it's an amazing outcome, and it's definitely impacting the team dynamics and impacting the product, because now like my employees come to me and be like, yeah, as you saw, like I had a conflict with Sam in that meeting, but guess what? I called him afterwards and we talk it through, and now things are great. So the outcome there is like you have less passive aggressiveness in meetings moving forward. You don't feel like you have to be the moderator between people. And at the end, it's just that the product doesn't suffer. Like people can work together and focus on what we are doing, which is building kick-ass product versus focusing on the drama.
So what comes to mind for me is senior leaders across the organization, especially. So in a lot of the work that I do now as I say fractional product leader, but essentially I get into these organizations and I play head of product for some period of time, often on a part-time basis while I'm getting the team staffed up. So part of my role is I need to come in, understand all of the players, understand where the product is at, and put forth some recommendations for how we staff and move the product forward effectively to reach the goals of the leadership team. What often happens is I need to understand the incentives and the personal goals of everybody involved. So with a recent example, I was actually working with a bootstrapped organization, which was new for me. Normally I'm working with VC-backed companies, but a bootstrapped organization that had been around for 15 years. They were profitable, but they had some significant product growth goals, and so they were starting to consider VC funding and wanted to be able to put together a team and a pitch that would resonate with these investors. And so I came in, I had to get to know the CEO, the head of sales, head of marketing. They had a head of strategy, which was a new one for me. And very quickly, what you realize is that each member of the leadership team has different personal incentives related to the business. So oftentimes your CEO or founders are very personally connected to the history of that business. They've been highly involved in everything. So the idea of giving up control or stepping away from the details is really scary. For sales, it's all about, the pressure to hit sales numbers and to, deliver on the sales funnel, or, part of their income depends on, the performance of the business. So they're highly attached to what they perceive is the most important thing on the product roadmap that's going to drive commission for them and their team. And so how radical candors come into play for me is I really focus on getting to know those personal drivers of everybody involved, which I think PMs in any organization should do anyways. This is going to allow you to speak their language, but also anticipate what their fears and concerns are going to be. But I've had to get good at challenging directly with that in mind and saying things that call out the elephant in the room. For example, hey, so-and-so, I know you were the founder. I see that this is tough. I know you're attached to the product, but if we want to grow it, we have to bring others in to help. How can I support you, right? How can I make that more comfortable? Can I involve you in the hiring process somehow? And so always trying to connect the dots like that. And so it's something I coach my PMs on as well when I'm working with them. And I just see that time and time again, as soon as it makes the solution to the conversation even feel more obvious when you have that insight on what's driving that person and where that fear or concern might be coming from.
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that, and this is where I think this talk can help all of us as product managers, right? Not just managing people and whatnot, but I found that being a really good tactic where often in our histories we've probably seen where you have competing priorities and different backlogs coming from customer support and sales and marketing and whoever else. And where I found radical candor kind of manifest helping that problem is just through like transparency and communication with those business teams, and then the entire group can be more radically candid about what's going on, because you often get those siloed backlogs and nobody knows why their stuff's not getting done. Why is it not getting prioritized? Why are we not shipping enough of their features that they need to make their jobs and lives easier? So it was pretty early in my kind of product career where I had a great leader, probably one of the better product leaders I've ever been with. He's with Atlassian now doing a ton of their stuff, but he brought the entire team into the room. Instead of having these siloed conversations, it's like, look, team, we're all going to get in the room. You all have competing priorities. We have limited resources. Let's get in here and hash it out. And we laid it out on the table, radically candid, why you're not getting some of your stuff done, why some of your features are not getting bubbled up to the backlog. But then it was very transparent across those teams. Customer support saw like, look guys, we're in a growth mode right now. We know it's painful a little bit for you guys, but the entire company is saying these are more important priorities, including them. When they were in that room, they were like, we get it, right? To hit our company goals and to do this, we get it. And we understand now why we have to burden some of the pain with manual processes and maybe adding more humans to the problem versus solving it with software. But that was like one of the most radically candid setups for like kind of roadmap reviews and priorities that I had seen. Most of the time it's like, hey, let's go play these political games across the organization. Let's hide why stuff's not getting done. Nobody knows why stuff's not getting done. But when we brought everybody into the room and we're like, look, it's going to be a frank conversation. CEO sitting right here. If you want to ask him or her a question, they can tell you why. It's also up to them and what feedback they're getting from the board. So that's kind of a good radically candid way to bring it, roadmaps and cross-functional teams into play and really help that process. Everybody left the meeting, they're like, oh, we get it. Like we're aligned, like we understand now what's going on for the next couple months or quarter and stuff like that. So as a good way to see that come to play.
Nice. Awesome. So we have about 5 minutes left. We have one more question, and then maybe we can take one or two questions from the audience if there are any. But just to wrap it up and bring it all home, how have you guys seen Radical Candor have a direct and positive impact on your products?
Awesome. I'll answer this one quick because I think it was on one of the slides, but it's, first set up the trust amongst your team. If you see that breaking down, focus on that first. But then it's through retrospectives, it's through design critiques, it's through making sure no individuals own something, which LP had up here on the slides. And that really helps your product team. Then we can all it's not about you, it's not about what you own. Are we all here to ship good products for users that are valuable? It'll make your products better. You have to work with your team on getting there, breaking down some of those kind of ownership silos and that's not an easy thing to do. It'll take some time depending on the team that you have. But I think it can absolutely have a very direct impact on how your teams operate and what they ship. So,
How Radical Candor impact product. So I feel like when you're in product, you can be successful if you're not able to push back on stakeholders, on other departments. We all have that sales guy that come to you, knock at the door, they're like, hey, I was talking to this customer, they want this feature, we know we can sell it. And that's where like the principle of Radical Candor come to play, because I care about you, sales guy. I care about your sales numbers and hitting them, but I gotta challenge you directly. Like that's not in the roadmap. It's not gonna be in the roadmap for another 8 months, 12 months. It is what it is. But yeah, at first it was super hard to do that. But the more you practice it, and the more also like you build that trust with that person, because there were some moments when he will come to you and you're like, actually, that's a great idea, and we have a project that is going right now that we can fit that in. So like there is always kind of like room sometimes, but they do expect now when they come to me that I will challenge that, and that to me like results in the product we wanted to build, because we're able to push back without really ruining the relationship with the rest of the business.
All right. I totally agree, by the way. So I have a dream that at some point all PMs will work at companies where they're given outcomes to achieve and not features to deliver. So I'm going to go to a slightly different direction and say, I think one of the areas where Radical Candor can impact products the most, and an area where I focus a lot of time and energy, is challenging founders and leaders who don't realize that they're giving their teams prescriptive solutions and not getting the most out of their teams, right? By saying, hey, we need to deliver X feature in 2 weeks, it gives the team absolutely no ability to consider better options, to conduct discovery, to validate that problem, all of the things that can go wrong. And so I remember specifically working with a CTO and a CEO just prior to them closing their Series A. They've since, I think they're on their Series C, and they've seen tremendous growth, which is awesome. But I remember sitting in the room as the fractional CPO with the CTO and CEO, and we were just sorting out OKRs for the upcoming quarter. And they kept giving me tactics. The OKR was like, hire 2 PMs. I was like, that's not a tactic. Why are we hiring 2 PMs? And it feels obnoxious at times, but I was able to just repeatedly question them because I had built that trust. And I knew that it's kind of like raising a kid. I say this as someone who doesn't have kids. I just have a dog. But like, you do it because it's what's best for them in the long run. And so in the moment, it's really painful and you have to get past that. But for me, it was like getting comfortable with the fact that it's worth this awkwardness right now to get to the point where I can give the team outcomes.
Awesome. Oh, Madi?
No, nothing.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you, guys. If there are any questions, I don't know where Ryan is, but I'm okay to take them. Right row?
So, feedback is a gift, right? I think I've heard that up there. How do you foster an environment where you're promoting upward feedback, right? As managers, how do you get feedback from your team about your performance or management?
To me, I just bring that up in the one-on-ones constantly. I always end the one-on-one is like, is there anything I can do to help you? Do you have any feedback for me? And I think after a while, like my teams just expect that, so they know they're coming to the one-on-one, and I am going to ask the questions. And you can see like the progression through the months and the years, where like at first it's like, no, I don't have any feedback for you, and it's like for months I don't have any feedback for you, but I always ask the question. And that is one time that we're like, actually, I have something, this and that. And at least that's how it worked for me. I don't know from your guys' experiences.
Yeah, I have something on that. I'm like painfully open usually with my clients. I don't know if Adam knows this about me. And so a technique that I've used, because I've had plenty of those, it's like, give me feedback. And people are like, everything is fine. So I'll often share. I'll be like, hey, I've noticed, like, I have a tendency to be late. I have like no concept of time. So I don't know. I'm working on being more on time or more prepared or whatever, something I'm working on so that I can express some vulnerability. And instead of saying, do you have any feedback? Just saying, have you noticed that? So you're like priming them to give feedback so that it doesn't feel as intimidating as like coming up with something brand new. And I think to your point, over time, it develops this muscle and comfort, and you're like, and that person can see, oh, I can give feedback without retaliation. And so that's really where the trust has come from for me.
Yeah, and I'll add, to open those doors, one thing I'll do is like, we have every other week one-on-ones with most of our like direct reports or whatnot. And maybe every third one of those, I'll set them up a couple weeks ahead of time and say, hey, this next one-on-one is not your one-on-one, it's a one-on-one for me. So I want you to come with feedback. I want you to come with thoughts. And, Laura knows this. The first few are like, very passive. She's like, oh, things are great. You're like, I like you. You're a good manager, all this stuff. And I'm like, no. Like, next time you come to this meeting, like, I want you to have like 2 things I can improve on, right? Like, so almost challenging her directly. The door is open. I need you to tell me how to improve, both as a direct manager. Tell me how to be a better, like, founder of Crafted, right? Like, our success is based on you telling me what to do better. So being very direct that way, opening the door and just look, like, you got to tell me. Then we do some of that with our own teams. Like, you need to go have a one-on-one with some of your peers, kind of 360 review style, but like, don't just go pat each other on the back. Tell each person like one thing that they can do better, like whether it's within a project or for Crafted in general. And just, you kind of got to force it a little bit. But then we've all figured out ways to work on like the trust factor, right? So you can't go in that bullish sense. But yeah, we really try to advocate it and just push for it. Like, we want feedback because, like you said, it's a gift. So like, make your team stronger. Like, do we all want to be on the A team or do we all want to be on the C team, right? Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think somebody said it earlier as well, but being really open that like this is a framework that you're actively working on, or introducing the concept, again, like being vulnerable and creating that space, but calling out that it's like something that you're doing, and then hopefully it is contagious throughout the organization. In the back.
So I'm curious if you had a similar situation when you were advising, right? So I'm a CTO and we're a smaller startup that recently acquired a bigger company. We hired a product manager who I'd say is probably in the obnoxious aggression, but gets results and works well in our startup organization because we're all kind of hard-headed that way, but not as good cross-functional, like to, let's say sales, but not just sales, other large organization that's a little bit slower, let's say. And
Yeah, I mean, Jessica mentioned that with the story you were starting to tell. One thing I would say is like coaching them, and whether that comes from you as a CTO or if this person has another manager or whatnot, like we know such a big part of being a successful product manager is political capital, right? One thing we talk about at Crafted is this book, Ideal Team Player, where hungry, humble, and smart. The smart axis not being like, are you book smart? It's, are you people smart? And do you understand how you're treating your peers, how they perceive you? You know, if you're burning bridges, man, you might be able to go ship some product for a while, but one after one, those bridges are going to burn, and then you're kind of toast. You're on an island. So just teaching that person that, like, look, you have to go, like, build up these relationships. You're going to need them in the future. One of our designers has a good thing when giving design feedback. He's like, I have to pay into the bucket more than I pull out of the bucket, right, when I'm giving feedback. So I want to make sure I give better feedback. That way, when I do have to give constructive feedback, I'm not taking out more than my bank account has in it. So maybe just working with that person on figuring out how to manage their political capital. Relationships are everything. I always say, like, tech is not easy, design, software, all this stuff is not easy. The people aspects of what we do are by far the hardest part. So you got to focus your time and energy there if you want to be kind of successful long term. I think in the short term you can ship some stuff, but it'll eventually start to fade away. So.
Yeah, I also would suggest bring up the matrix, see where he or she thinks that they fall. That obviously just kind of brought it up earlier around like self-awareness, but gauge where they think they are, and then that also helps you give some feedback as well and nudge them to where you need them to be.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I was that person. Which is cool, I guess. Not really. For this purpose, it is. I was that person. That was why I got set up with a really expensive leadership coach, because my organization was like, you've been kicking ass, but you're having some impact. And so I think there's a couple things you got to consider. Is that person aware? Are you aligned on the outcomes? And why are they behaving that way? So what I learned was that my natural state is to be really honest and open and to value authenticity over effectiveness, which often led me to get really frustrated with the political game and be like, it's not on me to navigate all these weird relationships and politics, and how dare I have to spend time on it? And what my leadership coach helped me realize was that it's kind of like a healthy relationship, right? It's not about winning that situation. It's about fighting with the person to win, it's not about winning over the other person. It's about winning the situation. And so for me, it took a while, to be honest. And it's a tendency that I still have to fall into. But if it weren't for that leadership coach, if it weren't for the people around me, helping me to first see it, figure out how I could align my personal goals with actually doing that hard work. But all that aside, I think at the end of it all, something to consider is that so I ended up with someone on my team after I had solved my issue, and I had like a mini me with all the same challenges. So I was able to see it. I was able to try to coach it. And unfortunately, they were not able to make the changes that we needed. And so in that situation, I did have to make an adjustment to the team for the greater good. So I think, as a manager, it's about figuring out that boundary, because at some point it's going to impact the organization more broadly.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm sorry. We probably should. Jesus. I know. Terrible.
Sorry, I threw that hand up really quickly. But I, like in our lives, we work for a consulting firm, and a lot of times we get put on projects that are really short. You are thrown in with the client and expected to understand the scope of work, but also build that trust and have that dialogue, that open dialogue. It's just difficult when it's a short engagement that there's a lot of work to do to implement different situations where you could have radical candor with a client, but also being comfortable as a developing leader working with industry leaders with these engagements. So I'm just curious if there's any advice for specific situations where you don't have a lot of time, but you need to have radical candor for requirements and scope and things like that.
I do have a couple of things. In-person kickoffs. I don't mean Zoom. I know that sounds nuts. I hate traveling, but in-person kickoffs can really help. If you can't do that, I will start all of my projects, because I do discovery in about 2 weeks with my clients. So I've experienced the same exact thing. I will have one-on-one time with every single key stakeholder. And that is transformative then to my relationship with each of them, plus the relationship with the group. So like that's one technique that's worked really well for me. Oh yeah, sure. You should see my notebooks. I mean, I don't share it with them, and there's asterisks on like where those strong personalities are, and like this person doesn't have the title, but for some reason they have the clout or the tribal knowledge. So yeah, it's like those one-on-ones allow me to figure out not just the org chart that's on paper, but the real org chart that's at play day to day, and that gives me then the ability to navigate that organization effectively.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jess. In-person kickoffs, go to lunch with them. If you're, there you go. If you're consulting, if your agency allows to take them to happy hour, take them to happy hour. That's where people kind of like talk a little bit more and you build that relationship. But also retros, like besides just meeting with people one-on-one, have like a weekly retro hour where everybody kind of like feels free to say how things are going and initiate that, be the first to give kind of like the positive and the negative kind of thing in a graceful way. So that kind of like helps the situation.
Last thing I'll add there on the consulting side, like you mentioned, is it's okay being transparent. I don't know how your organization operates, but like going in and after a meeting being well set up, but then saying like, hey, here's the things we don't know. Here's the things we need to uncover. I think some people are taught like, oh, we're consultants. We have to be the experts and know everything. You're dropping into industries you know nothing about, and it's okay to tell your clients that. You almost build trust by saying like, here's what you're good at. Here's what we're good at. We have some blind spots. Let's figure these out. And being able to let down your guard just a little bit versus saying like, no, we're consultants. We've got it all figured out. Just like, that's just going to put you in a silo and give you black boxes that later, a day later, a week later, a month later, then they're problems. So just be like, hey, here's the unknowns we have. We need to work through these. We'll be crystal clear with you on what we need or what we don't know. And then hopefully that builds the trust. And they're the domain experts. You're the delivery experts. And you can go from there. So.
Yeah, I'd also add, we've had engagements as short as 3 months. And I would say being the example between your teammates. So, obviously it's going to take time to build a relationship with the client, but, like Adam and I have a rapport and we can be radically candid with each other. And so doing that and just being the example also kind of allows the client to see that. Obviously, like being super transparent and vulnerable is also super helpful. And I would also just say like being persistent. I think Matt O'Shields, if you're listening, this is to you. But I had a 3-month engagement, and the PM that I was paired up with really wanted nothing to do with me or us or really anything, and actively avoided any interaction for like the first couple weeks. Like took any meeting that like was not at all like relevant to us, just to kind of, he didn't know what he was signing up for. And I took him to coffee every single day, forced him to like, the walk to the coffee shop really just kind of allowed us to build that rapport. And I would say it took a couple weeks, but there was just a persistence there, and it was very light. We weren't like, talking about anything heavy or giving extreme feedback right off, but just really being persistent about building that relationship. He's now a great friend in and out of the office, and we've had a great relationship ever since. But we joke about how he just like actively avoided everything, and then that relationship, and we were able to do that pretty quickly, but it required a lot of persistence. Any other questions? Yeah. Here, hold on. Sorry.
Sure. Thanks.
For the people.
For the people. So feedback, opinions. Sometimes it's like pretty objective, like there's something wrong and you know what needs to be fixed. But when you're giving feedback on more subjective things, what is your like verification process internally before you voice that opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that can work is getting team feedback. You could have that person go to their peers. Things like design critiques. There's also kind of a sub-talk that could come out of this is like certain small language you use, especially when you're working with a balanced team, whether it's direct feedback to a person about their operating mode or products. Be careful with the language you use, right? Like I think we've all heard the mini talks about like you should, right? Don't should on me and stuff like that. So be careful with the language you use because that can set up defensiveness. That can make it feel more personal. Like one of LP's slides was make it less personal and say like, hey, I have feedback about that design. I have a different opinion about what the user journey might be, what the feature should be, something like that. It's just an opinion. Let's put our opinions on the table. Let's talk through the opinions, and then come to the best outcome for the team and for the product. I'm not telling you your designs are wrong or your feature is wrong or your code. So kind of abstract the personal aspect of it, and just let them know it's also your opinion. You're not saying you're right? You're saying like, I have a different thought. Let's talk about it. Could be a good approach, but.
Don't have much to add. That was good.
So we're product people. We're taught to focus on the problem first. So something that I will do, I'm actually, it's funny, I'm in this situation right now with one of my clients. I had essentially a designer come to me and say, I feel like I've said all this stuff 15 times. Essentially CPO continues to ask me the same questions. I'm so frustrated. And so it's a classic he said, she said situation, right? So when I get into these situations, there's a couple things that I will do. The first one is try to establish like what success would look like. So what is the outcome here? Is the outcome that these two people are best friends, or is the outcome, that everyone understands where we're going? And so that then usually helps me target like who needs to be involved in conversations and how. So then from there, I'll approach the problem solving situation either by telling them they need to go talk to that person, but sometimes it's beyond that. Or like in this case, I think there was actually a go-to-market issue or go-to-market strategy was not thought about early enough. And now we're just feeling the repercussions of that. So I can help them get ahead of it for next time. But I think there's some relationship mending to do in the meantime. So what I will do in those conversations is put it on me. And I'll say, I'm noticing that there's some frustration in the team, or I'm noticing that this particular thing didn't happen. What do you think? And so I won't go into, I know I'm giving feedback, but the person I'm talking to thinks I'm having a conversation. And so it sounds manipulative, I guess, when I say it like that, but that's what's worked for me, because then I can quickly assess, like, are they even aware of an issue? Do they have thoughts? Maybe they're already aware of it and they've been trying to solve it. And I have the benefit often of being an outsider, but typically I'll get people kind of quickly breaking their facade and being like, oh yeah, that person's a total a-hole. And be like, okay, all that aside, like, what can we do to move forward? So it's like being outcome driven first, then going in curious, as opposed to that obnoxious aggression that I tend to fall into.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being an amazing audience. We can hang here if you guys have any other questions. And, our amazing panelists, let's give it up for them. Thank you for being so radically candid. Everybody's on LinkedIn, and, feel free to look us up and contact us. But thank you all, and happy Denver Startup Week.